let's have a little extra issue, Foreign 2021.
President-elect Joe Biden says he'll strengthen America's relationship with foreign allies. But what can we expect from Biden's foreign policy, specifically? Well, Biden has promised to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, which entails binding carbon emission reduction targets. Biden also says he'll rejoin the Iran nuclear accord. But that ambition would appear to face obstacles in the form of rising Iranian nuclear proliferation outside of the deal's limits. And on China, Biden says he wants cooperation, but also aims to establish more unified global constraint of China's aggressive foreign policy.
Pat, your thoughts on what we can expect from the first 120 days of a Biden foreign policy?
Tom, I think Joe Biden could face early in his presidency, in the first months, a real danger of a collapse in Afghanistan. We're down to 2,500 American troops. The Taliban are on the move everywhere. There are bombs in Kabul routinely. And I think the question would be, is America prepared to take a defeat in Afghanistan, or let that whole thing go down the way Saigon went down? On Iran, Tom, Iran does not want a bomb. It doesn't want that low-grade uranium ore. It wants total relief of those sanctions.
Okay, Eleanor, what do you think we can expect?
Well, I think Pat's too apocalyptic about Afghanistan. I strongly doubt that those troops have come out according to Trump's order. I think the military is slow walking that. I think everybody is trying to hold their breath and keep the lid on things until he leaves office. On Iran, I agree with Pat that the nuclear deal needs to be re-entered. I think Biden has to be careful how he does that, but I think that will be accomplished. And I really like the fact that he has put climate change at the center of his foreign policy. He's named John Kerry as a special envoy with cabinet level status. There's a recognition that the planet is in dire straits, and American leadership is really required if frankly, if we're going to survive. And the president-elect, the president in his first 120 days, I think will clearly get across to the world that America is serious about climate change.
You know, Eleanor, on that point, how does John Kerry, the Biden administration, take these concerted actions that you know on climate change, but in a way that holds other nations' verifiable action, holds them to their word? And China is an example there, which makes grand pledges about being carbon neutral by 2060, but brings hundreds of dirty coal plants on each year. You know, how does a Biden presidency say, yes, this matters deeply, and yes, we're going to make sacrifices, but you are too?
Well, you put teeth into accords and you call people out. But I think your comments about China are a bit overstated. I don't think they're as lax as you said, because they recognize they will drown in their own pollution if they don't get a handle on this. I also think it's tightly aligned with economic policy. And the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, the team that Biden is putting in place, they're all about workers and jobs. And there is opportunity in confronting climate change, and to quit buying into the old rhetoric about, oh, you're going to have to pay more for this and that, and you're going to lose jobs. This is about creating new industries. And I think China understands that, and I think Biden does too.
Okay, Shermichael, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to say China, Tom, and I say China because I'm primarily concerned with China and their focus on Chinese hegemony, which I originally thought was more so a regional plan because of what I've been seeing in the South China Sea. You've written about this, we've spoken about this before in the past, but it appears that it's pretty clear at this point that it's a global thing. And one can merely look at that, or make that assessment, I should say, rather, by the way the Chinese is utilizing their state-owned bank in developing nations. And so I think for the incoming administration, there has to be an acute focus on China and competing against China in many of these developing countries, and also really taking more of an aggressive stance, I would argue, with China as it pertains to some of their military developments in the South China Sea and other aspects of the world.
All right, Clarence, your thoughts on the foreign policy first 120 days?
Well, indeed, everyone here is making good points. I would add that I think Joe Biden with whatever time he has left after dealing with all these other crisis areas, reestablish ties with our NATO allies and reassure them that the old gang is back in town now, the old gang from the Obama-Biden era, and reassure them that the United States is the partner it has been since World War II, the early days of NATO, and that this is the kind of a reassurance that's needed right now, especially with the NATO countries, many of them having internal disputes of their own in regard to how much they want to stay in the European Union and issues like that. So he's going to be a busy president.
You know, there is an important point here, Pat, that President Trump really did, come from a base of anger about the idea of wealthy European countries like Germany spending 1.3% of GDP on defense when the baseline is 2%. And so how does President Biden manage to support his idea of strengthening that long-standing and I would say very important alliance, but in a way that reflects America's expectation that allies do their fair share? Is that possible?
I mean, look, these go back 60, 75 years. The United States, this country is not going to go to war with a nuclear power like Russia over Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, which are former republics of the Soviet Union. So I think what the United States ought to do is, quite frankly, just tell them, look, fellas, work it out with the Russians, your own defense. I mean, do you really think if the Russians went into Estonia, the Spanish would declare war on Russia? Well, I mean, we better wake up and we're in a new world.
Eleanor, I would say the United States absolutely should go to war if a Baltic member state is invaded, and that the Russians should understand that. But I also do take on board the idea that President Trump was onto something when he said it has to be fair, and it hasn't been fair. And I fear that under Joe Biden, there'll be a lot of happy talk, but the unfairness in terms of what some of these countries do will sustain.
Look, we get a lot out of that Western alliance. It's not us giving everything to them. We get a huge benefit back, and we get a huge benefit from a Europe that has been peaceful for 70 years when you look back at those destructive wars. So it's not a win-lose situation. They don't pay enough, and that irritated Obama and Clinton and probably Jimmy Carter. But you don't need to insult them about it. You work it out. They're doing a little better, and it's not the heart and soul of the relationship. So I think the NATO as a shield is a very important institution that has withstood the test of time. And Putin is a weakened leader. He talks big, but he has barely an economy that functions. He's got a lot of problems with COVID. And once his benefactor is out of office, i.e. Donald J. Trump, I don't think Putin is going to loom quite so large on the horizon as he has the last 4 years.
Shermichael, on this idea of NATO and cost benefit, where do you stand?
I mean, look, I think President Trump, Tom, raised some very interesting points. And if you look at some studies from Pew Research over the past several years, they point to the fact that many Americans, regardless of their political persuasion and even ethnicity, do believe that other countries, our allies, should pay their fair share. And so I think while you can expect the Biden administration to sort of return to some level of normalcy, I do believe, Tom, they're going to have to address this idea where the overwhelming burden is on the American taxpayer and not on the taxpayers of those other countries.
Okay, well said. I agree with that. Clarence, you mentioned this first, and you are the veteran here, as we like to point out. Do you think there's a way for Joe Biden to kind of thread the needle here in a more effective way? Eleanor does make that point that President Trump kind of made it easy for European leaders who have populations who don't necessarily want more defense spending to not do it, because they could simply say, I'm not going to listen to that bullying American president. Is there a way for Biden to do better on this issue?
Well, the United States has always made it easier for them to put a lot of that cost burden on us, because we want to have a presence there. The United States, the whole NATO is established to be a stabilizing force across Europe. as with other major treaty organizations. And I think that the amount of money that is paid for NATO defense, we do, as Eleanor said, get that back in a number of ways. It's all of a piece. We talk about trade relations, et cetera, and diplomatic relations. It is all of a piece. And we shouldn't treat our NATO allies like they're a bunch of freeloaders. They've been through sacrifices too. They in turn look upon us as the smug United States, way across the big waters. You haven't got to worry about somebody rolling their tanks down your main streets like we do. And so, this goes back and forth. That's what diplomacy is all about. But I think we're going to have a more realistic diplomacy.
Okay. All right, Pat, I'll give you the final word because I think you speak for perhaps the minority on the panel here, but a lot of people in the country.
What I would say to the Europeans, look, fellas, you don't want to spend for defense, don't spend for it. We're going home. The Soviet Union doesn't exist. Communism doesn't exist in the East. We don't think the Russians are going to invade, but you got more money, more people, everything else. Deal with it. We've been carrying the freight here. The Cold War is over 30 years ago. America's coming home. Our future problems lie in the Far East.
Very quick, Eleanor, then.
There are some people who remember World War II, and they're not so eager to see Germany and or Japan turn into military powers. Just saying.